Walking into the Summit Plaza lobby, I savored the irony of the moment. My ex-husband Mitchell was about to sign his company's biggest lease extension yet, with me, though he didn't know it. The same man who left me for his secretary and said, I'd never amount to more than a housewife was about to discover that I now owned the very building his precious company called home. As he strutted into the conference room, his new wife Ashley trailing behind him, I suppressed a smile. The property acquisition papers in my briefcase were about to change everything. The marble floors of Summit Plaza echoed under my heels as I made my way to the executive conference room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 years had transformed me from Allison Parker, the naive housewife Mitchell had discarded, into Allison Reynolds, CEO of Vertex Properties, one of the city's fastest-growing commercial real estate firms. Most tenants knew me only by reputation or through intermediaries, a strategy that had served me well, especially for this moment. Through the glass walls, I could see Mitchell adjusting his designer tie, probably rehearsing the speech he'd give about his company's tremendous growth and why they deserved preferential lease terms. He hadn't changed a bit. Same arrogant posture, same way of commanding attention, same habit of keeping his new wife Ashley, his former secretary, 2 steps behind him. The conference room door opened smoothly under my touch. "Good morning," I said, watching Mitchell's eyes sweep over me without recognition. 3 years, a complete style transformation, and his own self-absorption worked in my favor. "I'm representing Vertex Properties today." "Finally," Mitchell huffed, checking his Rolex. "We expected the owner. I specifically requested—" "I apologize for any confusion," I interrupted smoothly, setting my briefcase on the polished table. "I assure you, I have full authority to handle this negotiation." Ashley shifted uncomfortably in her seat, perhaps picking up on something in my voice that Mitchell, in his arrogance, missed completely. The room filled with the soft sounds of papers being arranged as our respective teams settled in. Ryan, my chief legal counsel, sat to my right, while Logan, my operations director, took the seat to my left. Both had been instrumental in the confidential acquisition of Summit Plaza 3 months ago, and both knew exactly who Mitchell was. Their presence was both support and witness to what would unfold. "Let's begin," Mitchell announced, rather than asked, launching into his rehearsed speech about market positions and corporate growth. I let him talk, studying the man who had once been the center of my world. 10 years of marriage had ended with a text message of all things, while I was visiting my sick mother. "Things have changed," he'd written. "Ashley understands my vision. You never did. The divorce papers are being delivered tomorrow." That was the moment that had broken me, and then rebuilt me into something stronger. While Mitchell flaunted his new relationship all over social media, I'd quietly enrolled in real estate finance courses. While he bragged about his company's expansion, I'd learned the intricacies of commercial property acquisition. While he built his business empire within these walls, I'd been building something far more substantial. "Which is why we're prepared to sign a 10-year lease extension," Mitchell concluded, sliding a proposal across the table. "Of course, we'll need significant concessions given our status as the building's anchor tenant." I picked up the proposal, skimming terms I'd already memorized. "Interesting," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "But I'm afraid these terms won't work for us." I reached into my briefcase, extracting a different document. "We have a counterproposal." Mitchell's face darkened. "Counterproposal? Do you have any idea who I am? Who Sterling Tech is in this market?" "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Mitchell." I met his eyes directly, watching as the first flicker of recognition crossed his face. "In fact, I know far more about you than you might think." Ashley's sharp intake of breath broke the sudden tension. "Mitchell," she whispered. "Isn't she Allison?" Mitchell's voice cracked slightly, his composure slipping for the first time. What are you— You work for Vertex? I smiled, savoring the moment I'd pictured for months. Not exactly. I slid my business card across the table, watching as his eyes fixed on the title. Allison Reynolds, CEO, Vertex Properties. I am— Vertex Properties. The color drained from Mitchell's face as the implications sank in. His company's entire operational hub, the prestigious address he bragged about in every interview, the building he assumed gave him leverage, all of it belonged to me. That's impossible, he stammered, looking to his legal team for support. The previous owner was looking for a quiet, private sale. I finished for him. Sometimes, Mitchell, the best deals are the ones no one sees coming. Rather like romance with one's secretary, wouldn't you say? Ashley flinched at that, but I wasn't here to twist. The knife. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about power, properly wielded. I opened the counter-proposal, my voice steady and professional. Now, shall we discuss the actual terms of your new lease? I believe you'll find them fair, though. Perhaps not as preferential as you were hoping for. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the document that would reshape not just Sterling Tech's future, but the power dynamic Mitchell had taken for granted for so long. The real estate empire I'd built was about to teach him its first lesson in humility, and this was only the beginning. Ryan began outlining the new terms, his voice carrying through the stunned silence of the conference room. I watched Mitchell's world shift on its axis, knowing that my journey from discarded wife to property mogul was about to become his most powerful reality check. The story of how I came to own Summit Plaza began 3 years ago, on what should have been a routine visit to my mother's hospital room. I'd been sitting beside her bed, discussing her recovery from surgery, when the message that would shatter my world lit up my phone. Mitchell's words, cold and clinical, had burned themselves into my memory. Things have changed. Ashley understands. My vision. You never did. The divorce papers are being delivered tomorrow. 10 years of marriage ended in a text message while I was holding my sick mother's hand. The timing was classic Mitchell. He'd waited until I was 200 miles away, unable to confront him immediately. By the time I'd rushed home that evening, he'd already cleared out his things and moved in with Ashley, his secretary of 8 months. He's not worth your tears, sweetheart, my mother had said when I called her, sobbing. But it wasn't just about Mitchell. It was about the life I'd put on hold, the dreams I'd shelved to support his ambitions. I'd given up my own career aspirations to manage our home, host his business dinners, and play the perfect corporate wife while he built Sterling Tech from the ground up. The divorce proceedings had been quick and brutal. Mitchell's lawyers painted me as a dependent housewife who'd contributed nothing to his success. Mrs. Sterling was uninvolved in any business dealings, they argued, pushing for a minimal settlement. Her role was purely domestic. Mitchell had sat there, arm around Ashley, nodding along as his legal team dismantled our decade together. You really never understood business, Allie, he'd said during our last mediation session, using the diminutive nickname I'd always hated. Ashley gets it. She sees the bigger picture. His new wife had smiled smugly, the expensive engagement ring on her finger catching the light, the same ring I'd once worn, I'd later learned. But Mitchell had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. During our marriage, I'd listened during every business dinner, absorbed every conversation about market trends and commercial real estate. While he saw me as mere set dressing for his corporate aspirations, I'd been learning, observing, understanding the intricate dance of power and property that drove our city's business world. The modest divorce settlement became my seed money. While Mitchell celebrated his new marriage with a lavish ceremony in the Maldives, I enrolled in intensive real estate finance courses. When he bragged about Sterling Tech's expansion in business magazines, I was quietly building relationships with key players in commercial property development. Every time he was photographed at charity galas with Ashley on his arm, I was meeting with investors, learning the art of property acquisition and management. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Logan Martinez, now my operations director, had been the first to take me seriously. We'd met at a real estate investment seminar where I'd challenged the speaker's assumptions about market valuation. "You've got good instincts," he'd said afterward. "And better yet, you've got something to prove." He'd introduced me to Ryan Thompson, a brilliant real estate attorney who'd become disillusioned with representing corporate giants. Together, we'd formed the core of what would become Vertex Properties. The name was deliberate. A vertex represented the highest point, the crown of achievement. It also meant a turning point, which felt appropriate for my transformation, our arrive. First year had been challenging. Mitchell's influence in the business community meant many doors were closed to us. "Isn't that Mitchell Sterling's ex-wife?" Whispers would follow me through networking events. Some assumed I was trying to compete with Sterling Tech, not understanding that my ambitions went far beyond simple rivalry. The turning point came when we successfully acquired a struggling boutique office complex in the financial district. Where others saw an outdated liability, I recognized untapped potential. Within 6 months, we'd transformed it into a thriving hub for tech startups, generating returns that caught the attention of serious investors. "You have a gift for seeing value others miss," Tanya Richards, our first major investor, had said. She'd become not just a financial backer, but a mentor, teaching me the nuances of large-scale property acquisition. Under her guidance, Vertex Properties grew from a small venture into a significant player in the commercial real estate market. Each success built upon the last. A block of retail spaces in the Arts District, a mixed-use development on the riverfront. With each acquisition, we refined our approach. Quiet, strategic, focused on long-term value rather than quick profits. Our reputation grew among those who mattered, while staying out of the spotlight Mitchell so desperately craved. When the opportunity to acquire Summit Plaza appeared, it seemed almost too perfect. The prestigious downtown tower housed not just Sterling Tech but several other major corporations. The previous owner, approaching retirement, wanted a private sale to avoid market speculation. Through careful negotiation and the relationships we'd built, Vertex Properties emerged as the ideal buyer. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Ryan had asked when we prepared the acquisition papers. "It's going to come out eventually that you own his building." I'd smiled, remembering Mitchell's dismissive words during our divorce. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing them exactly what they failed to see. The purchase had been completed with minimal publicity, structured through a holding company to maintain privacy. Mitchell, always more concerned with appearances than details, hadn't even noticed the change in ownership. He'd continued his weekly complaints about building management, unaware that each memo eventually crossed my desk. Now, 3 years after that devastating text message, I sat in my private office on the top floor of our headquarters, preparing for the meeting that would reveal everything. The sun was rising over the city skyline, glinting off the sleek glass and steel of Summit Plaza in the distance. My phone buzzed with a message from Logan. "Mitchell's lease negotiation team confirmed for 10 a.m. You ready for this?" I touched the thick folder containing the new lease terms, remembering Mitchell's words from our last encounter. "You never understood business, Allie." The irony would soon be complete. In just a few hours, he would learn exactly how much I'd understood, and just how far I'd come from being the naive housewife he'd so easily discarded. The weight of my achievement settled around me like a well-tailored suit. This moment wasn't just about showing Mitchell his mistake. It was about claiming my place in a world he thought I'd never understand. Vertex Properties now owned 12 major commercial properties across the city, but Summit Plaza would always be special. It represented not just a sound business investment, but a personal summit reached. My assistant Aaron's voice came through the intercom. "Your car is ready, Ms. Reynolds." I gathered my materials, checking my reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to Mitchell's ex-wife. Success had a way of transforming more than just your circumstances. It was time to show Mitchell exactly who Allison Reynolds had become. The Summit Plaza lobby had transformed since my last unannounced visit 2 weeks ago. Fresh orchids adorned the security desk, and the marble floors gleamed under the morning light, small changes I'd quietly authorized to prepare for today. The security guard, who knew my true identity, nodded discreetly as I passed. "Good morning, Ms. Reynolds," he murmured, barely audible. We'd carefully choreographed every aspect of this morning, including how building staff would interact with me. Until the revelation, I needed to maintain the appearance of just another Vertex Properties executive. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave me time to observe the other occupants, employees of Sterling Tech who had no idea their true building's owner stood among them. 2 young analysts whispered about the upcoming lease negotiation, their conversation carrying in the confined space. "Mitchell's been impossible all week," one muttered. "The lease thing has him stressed. Did you see the email about the meeting? Someone from Vertex is coming instead of the owner. He's going to lose it." I suppressed a smile, pretending to check my phone. If they only knew. The subtle power of standing there, invisible yet in complete control, was intoxicating. 3 years ago, I had been invisible to Mitchell in a very different way. Overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Now, invisibility was my choice, my weapon. The elevator opened onto Sterling Tech's main floor, a space I knew intimately, though I'd never set foot in it. Every renovation request, every maintenance report, every security footage had crossed my desk over the past 3 months. I'd studied the layout obsessively, preparing for this moment. Mitchell's corner office dominated the floor, its glass walls, offering a panoramic view of the city. Through them, I could see him pacing, gesturing emphatically while speaking on his phone. Ashley sat at her special desk near his office, no longer a secretary, but not quite an executive. Mitchell had created a unique position for her, something between assistant and partner, a detail I'd learned from HR reports. Logan materialized at my elbow, right on schedule. "Conference room is ready," he murmured. "Ryan's reviewing the final documents with legal." Mitchell's team arrived early to set up. "They've prepared quite a presentation." "Let them," I replied softly. "The more elaborate their proposal, the more satisfying the revelation will be." We walked past the open workspace where dozens of employees pretended not to watch us. Their whispered conversations fell silent as we passed, then resumed with increased intensity. News of Vertex's representative arriving had spread quickly, exactly as planned. The conference room itself was a testament to Mitchell's ego, the largest on the floor, with a custom-made table he'd insisted on installing last year. I'd approved that request personally, knowing this day would come. Now, the table's gleaming surface reflected the morning light as Mitchell's team arranged their materials with military precision. "They've prepared a market analysis," Logan whispered, indicating the thick binders at each place setting, trying to justify their demand for below-market rent. "Of course they have," I smiled, settling into a chair with a clear view of both Mitchell's office and Ashley's desk. Mitchell always did love his presentations. Through the glass walls, I watched Ashley approach Mitchell's office, probably to remind him of the time. Their interaction caught my attention, the way she touched his arm, the familiar smile they shared. 3 years ago, that sight would have cut deep. Now, it was merely anthropological, like observing specimens in their natural habitat. "The market analysis is actually quite good," Ryan commented, joining us with his own stack of documents. "Shame their data is 3 months old. The newest developments in the downtown corridor completely changed their argument." "Don't worry," I assured him. "I've memorized all the current numbers." Mitchell always did underestimate the importance of up-to-date research. More Sterling Tech executives filed in, each carrying identical binders, each throwing curious glances my way. I recognized them all from their personnel files. Tanya Richards, head of operations, Chris Anderson, chief financial officer, and several others who'd climbed the corporate ladder under Mitchell's leadership. Is it true? I overheard one whisper to another. The owner's not coming? Mitchell's furious. He spent weeks preparing for this negotiation. Their conversation cut, off as Mitchell himself appeared in the doorway, Ashley 2 steps behind him. He'd always had a flair for dramatic entrances, timing them for maximum impact. Some things never changed. Well, he announced, surveying the room like a general before battle. Shall we begin? The next 15 minutes were an exercise in restraint, as Mitchell's team launched into their carefully prepared presentation. Slides flashed across the screen, each one building their case for preferential treatment. I took detailed notes, not because I needed them, but because it gave me something to focus on besides the delicious irony of the situation. As you can see, Mitchell was saying, pointing to a graph, Sterling Tech's presence has increased property values in this entire district. We deserve recognition for that contribution. I noticed Ashley watching me intently from her seat beside Mitchell. Perhaps she sensed something familiar, or perhaps she was just trying to read my reactions to their proposals. Either way, her scrutiny added another layer of tension to the room. Logan leaned over, ostensibly to share a document, and whispered, "He's building to the big finish. You ready?" I nodded almost imperceptibly. The timing had to be perfect. Let Mitchell reach the peak of his presentation before the revelation. Let him think he was in complete control before pulling the rug out from under him. Furthermore, Mitchell continued, his voice carrying that familiar tone of absolute certainty, our market research suggests that comparable properties are leasing at significantly lower rates. We believe our proposal reflects a fair valuation. I glanced at my watch. Almost time. The sunlight streaming through the windows had reached the perfect angle, illuminating the conference room in a way that would make the upcoming moment even more dramatic. Everything was aligned for the revelation that would shatter Mitchell's carefully constructed world. As he approached his conclusion, I caught Ashley studying my profile more intently. Recognition flickered in her eyes, the way one might almost place a face from a dream. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hand moving to touch Mitchell's arm in warning, but he was too engrossed in his presentation to notice. The stage was set. The players were in position. 3 years of planning was about to culminate in a moment of perfect clarity. Mitchell Sterling was about to learn that the wife he'd discarded had become the most powerful person in his professional world. Your market analysis is impressive, I began, my voice carrying the quiet confidence that 3 years of success had built. But there are some significant oversights we should address. Mitchell's presentation had just concluded, and the satisfaction on his face was about to transform into something far less comfortable. Oversights? Mitchell's tone carried that familiar condescension I remembered so well. I assure you, our research is thorough. Perhaps if you'd brought the actual owner, they could better appreciate the complexity of— Let's talk about the Wellington development, I interrupted smoothly, referencing a project I knew intimately. Your analysis doesn't account for its impact on local market rates. Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. The Wellington development was still largely confidential, or so he thought. What he didn't know was that Vertex Properties had quietly acquired that property last month. The Wellington development is merely speculative at this point, he dismissed, though I caught the flash of uncertainty in his eyes. Our analysis focuses on concrete market factors. Interesting. I opened my laptop, turning it to face the room, because these architectural plans approved last week suggest otherwise. The blueprints I displayed caused a ripple of murmurs around the table. The Wellington will add premium office space to this district within 18 months, significantly, impacting market dynamics. Ashley shifted uncomfortably beside Mitchell, her eyes narrowing as she studied my face more intently. I could see the gears turning in her mind, trying to place me. Meanwhile, Mitchell's confidence showed its first crack. "How did you get access to those plans?" he demanded, leaning forward. "That information isn't public. Vertex Properties has extensive resources," I replied calmly, enjoying the way his jaw tightened. "We make it our business to stay informed about market developments. Speaking of which, shall we discuss your creative interpretation of Sterling Tech's growth projections?" The color drained slightly from Mitchell's face. I pulled out another document, one I'd saved for exactly this moment. "Your presentation suggests a 40% growth rate over the next 3 years, yet your own quarterly reports to shareholders project only 15 to 20%. "Those reports are confidential," Mitchell snapped, his composure slipping further. "This is completely inappropriate." "Actually," Ryan interjected smoothly, "as your landlord's representative, we have every right to verify claims made during lease negotiations. Financial due diligence is standard practice." I watched Mitchell's fingers drum against the table, a nervous tell I remembered from our marriage. Beside him, Ashley's discomfort had grown more pronounced. She whispered something in his ear, but he waved her off impatiently. "Let's be clear," Mitchell said, his voice carrying a hint of threat. "Sterling Tech is the anchor tenant of this building. We have relationships with the owner that precede any recent acquisitions." "Really?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Please, tell me more about these relationships." The challenge in my voice made him pause. For the first time, he really looked at me, not just as an obstacle to his negotiations, but as someone who might be more than they appeared. I saw the moment of hesitation, the first seed of doubt. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said slowly, studying my face. "You seem familiar?" "Do I?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart raced with anticipation. "How interesting. Perhaps we've crossed paths at industry events." Logan shifted beside me, ready to proceed with our carefully choreographed revelation. But I held up a hand slightly. Not yet. I wanted Mitchell to work for this realization. "Your analysis also fails to mention the 3 infrastructure improvements planned for this district," I continued, changing tactics. "Improvements that Sterling Tech specifically requested last year. In fact, there was a rather strongly worded email from you personally about the necessity of these upgrades." Mitchell's face flickered with confusion. "How could you possibly—" "October 15th, I believe," I pressed on. "You were quite insistent about the parking garage renovations. Called them criminally overdue, if I remember correctly." The room had grown very still. Every executive at the table recognized the email reference. It had been one of Mitchell's legendary outbursts, but only the building owner would know the exact content and date. "Who exactly are you?" Mitchell's voice had lost its condescending edge, replaced by something closer to wariness. Ashley suddenly grabbed his arm. "Mitchell," she whispered urgently. "Look at her eyes. Really look." I met his gaze steadily, watching as recognition finally began to dawn. The confident mask he'd worn all morning cracked further, uncertainty creeping in around the edges. "No," he said softly. "It can't be." "Having trouble placing me, Mitchell?" I asked, my voice carrying just a hint of the satisfaction I felt. "You once told me I'd never understand business, that I lacked vision, that Ashley here was so much better suited to your professional aspirations." The color drained completely from his face. Around the table, his executives exchanged confused glances, not yet understanding the drama unfolding before them. "Allison?" His voice cracked slightly on my name. "But you're currently deciding the fate of your lease?" I finished for him. "Yes, it appears I am. Life has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it?" Ashley's grip on Mitchell's arm had tightened, her own face a mask of shock. The woman she'd helped discard, the wife she'd replaced, now sat across from them holding immense power over their company's future. "This is impossible," Mitchell muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Vertex Properties? The acquisition? You couldn't possibly—" "Oh, but I could," I replied softly. "And I did. Shall we continue discussing those market rates now? I believe you'll find my understanding of business has improved significantly since we last spoke." The conference room had grown so quiet you could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Every person at the table was frozen, watching this unexpected drama play out before them. Mitchell's carefully constructed world was unraveling thread by thread, and we were only just beginning. "Now," I said, opening another folder with deliberate slowness, "about those lease terms you proposed." The stunned silence in the conference room transported me back to another pivotal moment, exactly 3 years and 2 months ago. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was sitting alone in my kitchen, surrounded by divorce papers and shattered dreams. The house still smelled faintly of the dinner I'd prepared the night before Mitchell sent that text, a meal he'd never come home to eat. "Mrs. Sterling," Mitchell's lawyer had said earlier that day, his voice dripping with practiced sympathy, "my client is prepared to be generous, given the circumstances." The circumstances, such a delicate way to describe betrayal. I'd sat there, listening as they outlined the terms. The house, a modest monthly allowance, a clean break from the business world Mitchell had always insisted I couldn't understand. The memory of that night crystallized sharply in my mind as I watched Mitchell squirm in his seat now. I'd been going through old papers, trying to make sense of my new reality, when I'd found it. A business plan I'd drafted 2 years into our marriage. Mitchell had laughed it off at the time, calling it cute, that I thought I understood real. Estate investment. "Honey," he'd said, patting my hand condescendingly, "stick to planning dinner parties. That's what you're good at." Ashley, newly hired as his secretary then, had been standing in the doorway, hiding a smirk. I'd folded the business plan away, burying my ambitions under the weight of his dismissal. But that night, alone in the kitchen, I'd reread my old proposal. The projections had been solid. The market analysis, though amateur, had shown insight. Properties I'd identified as promising investments had indeed appreciated significantly. Mitchell hadn't rejected my ideas because they were bad. He'd rejected them because they weren't his. "Your entire proposal is built on outdated assumptions," I said now, pulling myself back to the present moment. "Much like your assumptions about me, Mitchell." His face had taken on a ghostly pallor. "You can't. This isn't—" He turned to Ashley, as if she could somehow make this situation disappear, but she was staring at me with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. The memory of their wedding announcement filled my mind, how they'd posed in front of Sterling Tech's logo, Mitchell proudly declaring his marriage to a woman who truly understood his vision. The photos had been everywhere, each one a paper cut to my healing heart. But they'd also been fuel for my transformation. "Do you remember what you said to me during the divorce mediation?" I asked, my voice steady. "When I asked about my contributions to your success?" Mitchell's jaw clenched. He remembered. "You said, 'Planning parties isn't the same as planning business strategy, Allie.' You were so convinced that hosting potential investors, maintaining relationships with clients, understanding their needs and aspirations, none of that counted as real business acumen." I opened another folder, revealing documents that made Mitchell's eyes widen. Interesting, then, that those same relationships proved so valuable when I began acquiring properties. Your former clients remembered me, Mitchell. They remembered who really listened to their concerns during all those dinner parties. The room had grown uncomfortably warm. Or perhaps it was just the heat of long-suppressed truths finally being spoken. 3 years ago, I'd sat in my mother's hospital room, reading that devastating text message over and over, trying to understand how 10 years of marriage could end so coldly. You'll bounce back, my mother had said, squeezing my hand. You're stronger than he knows. She'd been right, though neither of us could have predicted just how completely I would reinvent myself. The night you moved out, I continued, watching. Mitchell shift uncomfortably. You left behind your files on the Summit Plaza acquisition proposal. Did you ever wonder why you lost that bid 3 years ago? Recognition flickered across his face. Summit Plaza had been his white whale, the prestigious address he'd coveted for Sterling Tech. He'd been outbid by a mysterious investor, forcing him to lease rather than own the building. Now, understanding dawned in his eyes. That was you? He whispered. Even then? My first major acquisition, I confirmed, though I acted through intermediaries. I'd learned from watching you, Mitchell. Sometimes the best power moves are the ones no one sees coming. Ashley's hand had fallen from Mitchell's arm, her designer bracelet catching the light, the same bracelet I'd once admired in a shop window, before Mitchell had bought it for her instead. The irony of her sitting here now, watching her husband's power crumble wasn't lost on me. Your dinner parties, Ashley said suddenly, her voice barely audible. The Robertson deal. That was you? Ah, you remember. I smiled slightly. Yes, that conversation over dessert about their expansion plans. The information you used to impress Mitchell, I was the one who cultivated that relationship. Just like I cultivated dozens of others while you two were busy convincing yourselves that I was nothing more than a corporate wife. The memory of that particular betrayal stung less now. Ashley had used information from my carefully planned dinner party to position herself as invaluable to Mitchell, showing him she understood business in a way his wife never could. The irony was almost poetic. Every spreadsheet you dismissed, I continued, pulling out more documents. Every market analysis you called cute, every investment suggestion you ignored, I kept them all. And while you were busy building Sterling Tech's public image, I was quietly building an empire. Logan shifted beside me, sliding another folder into view. Inside were photos of all 12 properties now owned by Vertex, including Summit Plaza. Mitchell's eyes darted over them, recognition and disbelief warring on his face. The Wellington development, he said hoarsely. The Riverside complex, the tech corridor, all of them? All of them, I confirmed. It turns out I understood business strategy quite well. I just needed the freedom to prove it. The sunlight streaming through the windows had shifted, casting long shadows across the conference room table. In those shadows, I could almost see the ghost of who I'd been, the underestimated wife, the dismissed dreamer, the woman Mitchell, and Ashley had so easily discarded. But she was gone now, replaced by someone far more formidable. Now, I said, straightening the papers before me, shall we discuss your new lease terms? I believe you'll find I'm quite thorough in my business. Dealings these days? The temperature in the conference room seemed to drop several degrees as I pulled out the new lease agreement. Mitchell's eyes remained fixed on the document, as if staring at it hard enough might change the reality of his situation. The Sterling. Tech executives around the table had grown eerily still, their earlier confidence evaporating in the face of this unexpected development. Before we proceed, I said, my voice carrying easily in the silence, let's review some interesting patterns we've noticed in Sterling Tech's building usage. I nodded to Logan, who distributed a series of reports I'd prepared personally. What is this? Mitchell demanded, though his voice lacked its earlier authority. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the document, another tell I remembered, from our marriage. He always fidgeted when he felt control slipping away. A detailed analysis of your company's actual space utilization, I replied smoothly. For instance, the entire east wing of the 38th floor, the one you insisted needed immediate renovation last year for critical expansion, has remained largely unused. Curious, given how forcefully you argued for those improvements. Ashley shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd been the one to submit those renovation requests, using her position to demand premium upgrades that, as I now revealed, had been unnecessary. The other executives exchanged glances, clearly wondering what other inefficiencies their CEO and his wife had written off as business expenses. "You've been monitoring our operations?" Mitchell's attempt at outrage fell flat. "That's standard practice for property management," Ryan interjected, his legal expertise adding weight to the statement. "All usage metrics are tracked for maintenance and security purposes, as clearly stated in your current lease agreement." I watched Mitchell's jaw clench as he remembered signing that lease, a document he'd probably barely read, too confident in his own importance to bother with details. Another lesson he'd failed to learn during our marriage. The devil was always in the details. "Your current rent," I continued, "was negotiated based on projected occupancy rates and usage patterns that haven't materialized. In fact," I pulled out another document, "your actual utilization is approximately 65% of what was proposed. This suggests either poor planning or—" I paused deliberately. "Intentional misrepresentation." The room grew tenser as the implications sank in. Mitchell had built his reputation on aggressive expansion, promising investors and board members that Sterling Tech was growing faster than their space could accommodate. Now, faced with hard data proving otherwise, that reputation began to crack. These numbers, Chris Anderson, Sterling Tech's CFO, spoke up for the first time. "They don't match our internal reports, don't they?" I raised an eyebrow, sliding another folder across the table. "Perhaps you should review the quarterly occupancy surveys your team submitted. The ones that mysteriously changed between department submission and board presentation." Mitchell's face flushed deep red as his CFO opened the folder. I'd spent weeks compiling these discrepancies, tracking how the original reports had been altered before reaching the board. It was exactly the kind of detail-oriented analysis Mitchell had always dismissed as beneath him. "10 minutes until the board call," Logan murmured, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The quarterly board meeting had been scheduled deliberately to coincide with our lease negotiation, another detail I'd carefully arranged. "You can't do this," Mitchell said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. "The board, our shareholders—" "Actually," I interrupted, "I can. And I have a responsibility to my shareholders to ensure all leases reflect actual usage and honest business practices." The irony of using corporate responsibility against him wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Ashley suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We should call our lawyers," she announced, reaching for her phone. "This is clearly an attempt to—" "To what, Ashley?" I asked calmly. "To enforce standard lease terms? To ensure accurate reporting? Please do call the lawyers. I'm sure they'd be very interested in reviewing these discrepancies as well." She sank back into her chair, the fight draining from her posture. The perfectly curated image she'd maintained, the savvy businesswoman who'd replaced the simple housewife, cracked like cheap veneer. "The board meeting starts in 9 minutes, I noted, checking my watch. "Would you like to review the actual usage data before explaining to them why Sterling Tech has been misrepresenting its space requirements?" Mitchell's eyes darted between the documents, his executives, and the clock on the wall. The carefully constructed narrative he'd built around Sterling Tech's explosive growth was unraveling thread by thread. Each piece of evidence I presented stripped away another layer of his facade. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Want?" I smiled slightly. "I want what any property owner wants: honest tenants who pay market-appropriate rent for their actual usage. The new lease terms reflect that simple expectation." The morning sun had reached its peak, streaming through the windows and illuminating the conference room in harsh clarity. In this light, every micro-expression on Mitchell's face was visible: the tightening around his eyes, the subtle downturn of his mouth, the way his gaze couldn't quite meet mine. 7 minutes, Logan announced quietly. The Sterling Tech executives were now openly reviewing the discrepancy reports, whispered conversations breaking out around the table. The corporate hierarchy Mitchell had built so carefully was showing its first cracks, and soon the board would see them too. "You've been planning this," Mitchell said, realization dawning in his voice. "All of it. The timing, the board meeting, the reports. 3 years of careful observation and planning," I confirmed. "You taught me the importance of strategic thinking, remember? Though perhaps not in the way you intended." The clock on the wall ticked steadily forward, each second bringing us closer to the board meeting that would reshape Sterling Tech's future. Mitchell's world was collapsing in perfectly calculated increments, and the revelation of my ownership was just the beginning. 5 minutes until the board call, I announced to the room. "Shall we discuss how you plan to explain these discrepancies, or would you prefer to review the new lease terms I've prepared? Either way, Mitchell, your next moves should be chosen very carefully." The weight of 3 years' worth of planning settled around us like a heavy cloak. Everything had led to this moment, every detail analyzed, every contingency prepared for. Mitchell was about to learn that the woman he'd dismissed as a simple housewife had become his company's worst nightmare. 2 minutes until the board call," Logan announced, his voice cutting through the tense silence. The conference room had become a pressure cooker of anxiety and realization as Mitchell frantically flipped through the discrepancy reports before him. "The new lease terms," I said, sliding the document across the polished table, "reflect current market rates adjusted for your actual space utilization. You'll find them significantly different from your expectations." Mitchell's hands shook as he opened the folder. His face, already pale, turned almost ghostly as he read the first page. The numbers I'd prepared were brutal in their honesty, stark contrast to the creative accounting he'd been presenting to his board. "This is more than double our current rate," he choked out. "It would devastate our operating budget." "Actually," I corrected, "it's the rate you should have been paying all along, had your usage reports been accurate. I have a responsibility to my shareholders, Mitchell, just as you have to yours." The pointed reminder of his upcoming board meeting made him flinch. Around the table, Sterling Tech's executives were now openly reviewing their own copies of the lease, their expressions ranging from shock to resignation. 60 seconds, Logan noted. Ashley reached for Mitchell's arm, but he shrugged her off. The polished corporate power couple facade was crumbling rapidly. "There must be some room for negotiation," she attempted, trying to catch my eye. "Given our long-standing relationship with the building." "Relationship?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the one built on misrepresented usage data and manipulated reports? That relationship, Ashley?" The computer screen at the end of the conference room lit up, indicating the incoming board call. Mitchell stared at it like a man facing execution, which in a way he was. His corporate empire was about to face its day of reckoning. 30 seconds, Logan announced. "This is what you want, isn't it?" Mitchell suddenly burst out, his voice bitter. "Revenge for what, Mitchell?" I cut him off coolly. "For the text message ending our marriage while I sat at my mother's hospital bedside? For moving your secretary into our home before the divorce was even filed? Or perhaps for spending years convincing me I couldn't understand business?" I leaned forward slightly. "This isn't revenge. This is business. You taught me that, remember?" The screen blinked with an incoming connection. Mitchell's board members would be joining any second, eager to hear about the lease negotiation he'd promised. Would secure their flagship location at preferential rates. 10 seconds, Logan said. I stood, smoothing my skirt with practiced calm. "Your board is waiting, Mitchell. Shall I explain the new terms, or would you prefer to do it?" The color drained completely from his face as the full impact of the situation hit him. His board was about to learn not only that their CEO had been misrepresenting space usage, but that his discarded wife now controlled their company's future. The connection went live, filling the screen with faces of Sterling Tech's board members. Their expressions were expectant, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in the conference room. "Good morning," the board chairman began. "Mitchell, I trust the lease negotiation is proceeding as planned?" Mitchell opened his mouth, but no words came out. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time, broadcast live to the very people he'd spent years impressing with artificial growth metrics and expansion plans. "Perhaps I should introduce myself," I stepped in smoothly, moving into view of the camera. "I'm Allison Reynolds, CEO of Vertex Properties. We recently acquired Summit Plaza, and I've been reviewing Sterling Tech's lease terms personally." The chairman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Reynolds? Not—" "Yes," I confirmed, watching Mitchell shrink further into his chair. "I believe some of you knew me under a different name. Now, shall we discuss the actual state of Sterling Tech's space utilization?" The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in professional decimation. With methodical precision, I laid out every discrepancy, every misrepresentation, every manipulated report. The board's expressions shifted from confusion to concern to outright alarm as the true picture of their company's situation emerged. "These usage patterns," the chairman interrupted at one point, "they don't match what we've been shown in quarterly reports." "No," I agreed, "they don't. The discrepancies are quite significant. I've prepared a detailed analysis for the board's review." With a nod to Logan, the damning documents were electronically distributed to each board member. Mitchell sat in silence, watching years of carefully crafted deception unravel. Ashley had given up trying to maintain her composed facade, her face a mask of barely contained panic. The executives around the table had begun distancing themselves physically from their CEO, a subtle but telling shift in allegiance. "Given these findings," I continued, "Vertex Properties has prepared new lease terms that accurately reflect market rates and actual usage. I should note that we're willing to be quite reasonable about the implementation timeline, provided full transparency is maintained going forward." The chairman's face had turned grave. "Mitchell, would you care to explain these discrepancies?" But Mitchell seemed beyond explanation. The man who had once dismissed me as incapable of understanding business sat mute as his professional reputation crumbled. Every fake metric, every inflated projection, every manipulated report had come back to haunt him. "I think," the chairman said after a long pause, "we need to call an emergency executive session. Mitchell, stay where you are. The rest of the board and I need to discuss this privately." The screen went dark, leaving the conference room in heavy silence. Mitchell stared at his reflection in the black screen, his empire crumbling around him. The perfect cosmic justice of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. "Well," I said, gathering my materials, "I believe we've covered everything necessary for now. My office will be in touch with the board regarding next steps." I paused at the door, looking back at the man who had once held all the power in our relationship. "Oh, and Mitchell? It turns out I understand business quite well. I just needed the right motivation to prove it." As I walked out of the conference room, the sound of my heels clicking against the floor echoed with finality. Behind me, I could hear the beginning of panicked whispers, the rustle of papers being gathered, the sound of a corporate house of cards collapsing. But I didn't look back. I had made my point, and now it was time to let the consequences unfold. Naturally, Logan fell into step beside me as we headed toward the elevator. "That," he said quietly, "was the most elegant corporate takedown I've ever witnessed." I smiled slightly, pressing the button for the lobby. "It's amazing what you can achieve when someone underestimates you completely. Shall we head back to the office? I believe we have other properties to manage." The lobby of Summit Plaza buzzed with unusual energy as I stepped out of the elevator. News travels fast in corporate buildings, and the morning's events had already begun sending shockwaves through the gossip channels. Employees clustered in small groups, their hushed conversations dying away as I passed. They didn't know exactly who I was yet, but they sensed something monumental had shifted in their carefully ordered world. "Ms. Reynolds," Logan said, checking his phone. "The building management team is waiting in your private office on the 48th floor. And Ryan says the board has been in executive session for 20 minutes now. I hadn't originally planned to maintain an office in Summit Plaza, but now it seemed appropriate, a visible reminder of the new power structure. The private elevator required a special key card, one that Mitchell had repeatedly requested but never received. Now I understood why the previous owner had been so adamant about maintaining that particular boundary. "Clear my schedule for the afternoon," I instructed as we ascended. "I have a feeling we'll be handling quite a few adjustments today." The 48th floor was a stark contrast to Sterling Tech's space below, where Mitchell had opted for aggressive modern design, all sharp angles and cold surfaces. I'd chosen something more sophisticated. Warm woods, subtle lighting, and comfortable yet professional furnishings created an atmosphere of quiet authority. Erin, my personal assistant, met us as the elevator doors opened. "The building management team is ready for you," she reported, falling into step beside me. "And we've received 17 urgent calls from other Summit Plaza tenants in the last hour. Word's getting around about the ownership change." "Of course it is," I smiled slightly. Mitchell never could keep dramatic news to himself. Even now, I could imagine him and Ashley trying to manage the fallout, their perfectly curated image, crumbling in real time. The building management team stood as I entered the conference room, 6 professionals I'd handpicked over the last 3 months, but had never met in person. Their faces showed a mixture of respect and curiosity. They'd been managing Summit Plaza under strict instructions, never knowing exactly why certain decisions had to be handled so delicately. "Please, sit," I gestured, taking my place at the head of the table. "I believe it's time we discussed Summit Plaza's new direction openly." "Ms. Reynolds," began Tanya Parker, the head of operations, "I assume the situation with Sterling Tech has been addressed?" "In progress," I confirmed, noting how she relaxed slightly. "Which brings us to our first order of business. I want a complete audit of all tenant usage patterns, starting immediately. No more courtesy overlooking of discrepancies, no more accepting explanations without verification." The team exchanged glances. They'd suspected for months that Sterling Tech's reports weren't adding up, but the previous management structure had discouraged too much scrutiny. That ended today. "Additionally," I continued, "all renovation requests will now go through a new approval process. No more automatic authorizations based on tenant size or perceived importance." I looked pointedly at the maintenance supervisor. "I believe you'll find this makes your job considerably easier." He nodded emphatically. Mitchell's constant demands for unnecessary upgrades had been a source of frustration for the maintenance team for years. "Ms. Reynolds," Ryan appeared in the doorway. "Sterling Tech's board has reached a decision. They're requesting your presence." I checked my watch. 45 minutes of executive session. Shorter than I'd expected, but then again, the evidence had been quite compelling. "Continue with the meeting," I instructed Logan. "I'll handle this personally." The trip back to Sterling Tech's floor felt different now. The security guard's respectful nod was open rather than subtle. Employees who had whispered behind their hands earlier now stepped aside with deliberate deference. Amazing how quickly corporate culture adapts to new power structures. I found Mitchell still in the conference room, though his posture had changed dramatically. Gone was the arrogant CEO who had strutted in that morning. In his place sat a man who had just watched his carefully constructed world implode. Ashley was notably absent. The board members' faces filled the screen once again, their expressions now grave but determined. The chairman spoke first. "Ms. Reynolds, thank you for joining us again. We've reached several decisions regarding the matters you brought to our attention." Mitchell's shoulders slumped further. Whatever was coming, he already knew it wouldn't. Be good. First, the chairman continued, we've appointed an interim CEO effective immediately. Mitchell will be taking an indefinite leave of absence while we conduct a thorough investigation of all company reports and metrics. I kept my expression neutral, though inwardly I noted the elegance of their solution. Not an outright firing that would panic shareholders, but a clear removal of power. Second, we would like to formally request a 30-day period to review and respond to the new lease terms. We understand they're more than fair given the circumstances, but we need time to adjust our financial projections accordingly. That seems reasonable, I agreed, watching Mitchell from the corner of my eye. He sat completely still, like a statue of his former self. And finally, the chairman's voice took on a different tone. We owe you an apology. Many of us were on the board during your divorce proceedings. We accepted Mitchell's characterization of your business acumen without question. That was our mistake. A mistake that had cost them dearly, though I didn't need to point that out. The irony spoke for itself. The past is behind us, I replied diplomatically. I'm more interested in ensuring Summit Plaza and Sterling Tech maintain a productive professional relationship moving forward. The meeting concluded shortly after, leaving Mitchell and me alone in the conference room. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. You could have exposed everything immediately, he finally said, his voice hollow. Why wait? Why let me keep digging myself deeper? I gathered my papers unhurriedly, considering my response. You know, Mitchell, you taught me something valuable during our marriage. You always said the best business strategy was letting your opponents underestimate you while they revealed their weaknesses. I paused at the door. I suppose I was a better student than you realized. As I walked through Sterling Tech's office, space one last time, I saw Ashley clearing out her special desk, her face streaked with tears. The executive team huddled in various corners, already distancing themselves from Mitchell's impending fall. A corporate empire built on artificial growth and manipulated numbers was crumbling, and in its place, something more honest would have to rise. My phone buzzed with a message from Logan. Building management meeting concluded. Ready to implement. All new policies. What's next? I smiled, stepping into the elevator. Schedule a meeting with our leasing team, I replied. I believe several prime office spaces may be becoming available soon. The doors closed on Sterling Tech's floor, and I felt no regret, no lingering emotion, just the quiet satisfaction of a long game well played. Mitchell had taught me about business strategy, yes, but he'd failed to realize that sometimes the best lessons come from watching someone's mistakes rather than their successes. 1 week after the dramatic revelation, Summit Plaza hummed with a different kind of energy. The changes I'd implemented were subtle but significant, transforming the building's atmosphere from one of hierarchical tension to professional efficiency. From my office on the 48th floor, I could observe the shifting dynamics playing out across every level. The audit results are in, Logan announced, placing a thick folder on my desk. You were right about the other tenants. Sterling Tech wasn't the only one playing loose with their usage reports. I opened the folder, scanning the detailed analysis our team had compiled. 3 other major companies had followed Mitchell's example, though on a smaller scale. It was amazing how one person's corporate culture could infect an entire building. Schedule meetings with each of them, I instructed. Let's address this professionally, without the drama that accompanied Sterling Tech's situation. After all, they hadn't made it personal by breaking my heart and stealing my secretary. Erin appeared in the doorway with my afternoon coffee. The contractors are ready to begin renovations on the 38th floor, she reported. And HR called. Apparently, several Sterling Tech employees have submitted their resumes to Vertex Properties. Including Ashley, Logan added with a slight smirk. Though I assume that one's going directly to the rejection pile. I raised an eyebrow at him. Actually, review her application like any other. Her ambition isn't a fault. It was her methods that were problematic. The surprised looks on their faces made me smile. Success means rising above petty revenge. Remember? The morning sun streamed through my office windows, illuminating the city sprawling beyond. Somewhere out there, Mitchell was probably still reeling from his fall from grace. The business papers had been surprisingly kind, reporting his temporary leave of absence without digging too deeply into the reasons. I'd made sure of that. Public scandal wouldn't serve anyone's interests. Ms. Reynolds, Ryan entered with another stack of documents. Sterling Tech's board has approved the new lease terms. They'd like to schedule the signing for next week. Their new interim CEO is making good decisions, I noted, reviewing the acceptance letter. Have you seen their revised usage proposals? Ryan nodded approvingly. Complete transparency. They're actually giving up 2 floors they weren't fully utilizing. The board is serious about cleaning house. A knock at my door interrupted us. Tanya from building management stood there, tablet in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but you should see this. The changes we implemented in the security protocols, they just caught something interesting. She handed me the tablet, showing security footage from the night before. There was Mitchell, trying to use his old executive access card to enter after hours. The system had denied him entry, one of the first changes I'd implemented. He stood there for 20 minutes, Tanya reported, trying different cards, making calls. Finally left when security approached him. I watched the footage of my ex-husband, once so powerful in these halls, being turned away like any other unauthorized visitor. The sight should have brought satisfaction, but instead, I felt a strange mix of pity and resolution. Update his access credentials, I decided. Standard business hours only, regular tenant protocols. He's still technically an employee of Sterling Tech, just not in an executive capacity. Logan looked surprised. You're not going to ban him? Completely? That would be emotional, not professional, I replied, turning back to my work. And I think we've all seen where emotional business decisions lead. The afternoon brought a steady stream of meetings, other tenants suddenly eager to ensure their relationships with the building's owner were on solid ground. Word had spread about the Sterling Tech situation, and no one wanted to be the next. Company caught in audit crosshairs. Vertex Properties stock is up 12%, Aaron reported during a brief break between meetings. The market apparently approves of our management style. I smiled, remembering how Mitchell used to dismiss my suggestions about transparent business practices. It turns out honesty can be profitable. Who knew? As evening approached, I took a walk through the building, something I'd started doing regularly since taking open control. Employees from various companies nodded respectfully as I passed. The fearful whispers of last week had been replaced by something closer to admiration. Near Sterling Tech's main entrance, I encountered Chris Anderson, their CFO, waiting for the elevator. He'd been one of the few executives to survive the board's purge, largely because he'd been trying to flag the discrepancies in their reports for months. Ms. Reynolds, he acknowledged, looking both uncomfortable and relieved. The new systems you've implemented, they're actually making my job easier. No more pressure to massage the numbers. Numbers don't lie, Mr. Anderson, I replied, echoing words Mitchell had once used against me. They just need people brave enough to tell their truth. Back in my office, I found an unexpected email waiting. It was from Ashley, not a resume as Logan had mentioned, but a personal message. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I watched you today, walking through the building like you've always belonged here. The truth is, you always did. I was so busy trying to prove I understood business that I never realized what real business acumen looked like. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a job. I just wanted you to know that you proved him wrong. You proved us all wrong. I sat back, considering how to respond. The Ashley who had helped destroy my marriage wasn't the same woman who had sat in that conference room last week, watching her world collapse. People could change. I was living proof of that. Thank you for your note, I wrote back. The past is past. Focus on building your future honestly this time. That's the best path forward for all of us. Looking out over the city as dusk approached, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 week. Summit Plaza's transformation wasn't just about new lease terms or audit protocols. It was about creating a culture of transparency and professionalism that would outlast any individual's influence. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Saw the Business Journal article about Summit Plaza's revolutionary new management approach. My daughter, the real estate mogul. I always knew you had it in you. I smiled, remembering how she'd held my hand in that hospital room 3 years ago, telling me I was stronger than Mitchell knew. She had been right, but not in the way either of us had expected. Strength wasn't about power over others or revenge for past wrongs. It was about building something better from the ashes of what was broken. As the city lights began twinkling on, I gathered my things to head home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that success built on integrity was the most sustainable kind. Mitchell had taught me about power, but I'd learned about leadership on my own. Sometimes the best lessons come from proving someone else's assumptions wrong. 1 month after the revelation that shook Summit Plaza, I sat in my office reviewing the quarterly reports. The changes implemented across the building had yielded impressive results. Occupancy rates were optimized, tenant satisfaction had increased, and our transparency initiatives were being hailed as an industry standard. "Ms. Reynolds," Aaron appeared at my door. "Mitchell's here for his appointment." I checked the time, exactly on schedule. Another change. The man who used to make others wait now arrived precisely when expected. "Send him in." Mitchell entered my office with none of his former swagger. The designer suits remained, but something fundamental had shifted in his bearing. Humility, it seemed, could be learned after all. "Allison," he nodded, taking the offered seat. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Your request was reasonable," I replied, pulling out the file he'd submitted. "You want to discuss Sterling Tech's space optimization proposal?" The proposal had caught me by surprise. A detailed plan for consolidating their operations, reducing their footprint while maximizing efficiency. It was actually quite impressive, showing the kind of careful analysis Mitchell had often dismissed as beneath him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice lacking its old arrogance. "About business, about leadership, about how wrong I was about so many things." I studied him carefully, remembering another conference room years ago where he'd laughed at my business proposals. The man sitting before me now bore little resemblance to that dismissive executive. "The board has me working with the efficiency team now," he continued. "No corner office, no executive privileges. Just analyzing data and looking for ways to improve operations." He smiled wryly. "Turns out I'm actually good at it when I stop trying to inflate everything." "I've reviewed your proposal," I said, opening the file. "It's thorough, practical, and honest. All the things you used to consider unnecessary." Mitchell nodded, accepting both the compliment and the criticism. "I learned from the best," he admitted. "Watching how you've transformed Summit Plaza, it's been educational. Painful, but educational." Through the windows, I could see other buildings gleaming in the afternoon sun. Some of them were now Vertex properties, each one a testament to the business acumen Mitchell had once dismissed. "How's Ashley?" I asked, genuinely curious. After the dramatic revelation, she'd disappeared from Summit Plaza, her carefully constructed corporate image crumbling, alongside Mitchell's. "Gone," he said simply. "Turns out our relationship was built on the same artificial foundation as my business practices. She left when the board stripped my position." He paused, considering. "You know, she actually said something interesting. Before she left. She said you were everything she'd been pretending to be." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The woman they'd dismissed as a simple housewife had become the embodiment of true business success they'd both been chasing. Life has a way of teaching us what we need to learn, I observed, though the lessons aren't always comfortable. Speaking of lessons, Mitchell shifted slightly. I saw the notice about Vertex's new mentorship program for women in business. That's good. Important. The program had been my latest initiative, designed to help other women avoid the barriers I'd faced. Success meant nothing if you couldn't use it to lift others up. We've had over 200 applications, I told him. Turns out there are a lot of women out there just waiting for someone to take their business ambitions seriously. Mitchell had the grace to look uncomfortable. I've been thinking about that too. How many talented people I probably dismissed over the years, just like I dismissed you. The waste of it. Our conversation was interrupted by Logan arriving with the latest building management reports. He paused, seeing Mitchell, but I waved him in. The energy efficiency upgrades you recommended, Logan addressed Mitchell directly. They're showing better results than projected. Cost savings are running about 15% above estimates. Mitchell's face showed surprised pleasure at the professional acknowledgement. It was probably the first genuine praise he'd received in months, based on actual results rather than inflated projections. The maintenance team had some good insights, he replied. When you actually listen to the people doing the work, turns out they know what they're talking about. I suppressed a smile, remembering how he used to ignore staff suggestions, convinced that good ideas could only come from the executive level. Another lesson learned the hard way. Well, Mitchell stood, gathering his papers. Thank you for considering the proposal. And for everything else. Everything else? For not destroying me completely when you could have. For showing me there's a better way to do business. For proving me wrong about you in the most spectacular way possible. He managed a small smile. The board's right. You're the best thing. That could have happened to Summit Plaza. After he left, Logan lingered, shuffling reports. That was unexpected, he finally said. Mitchell Sterling actually learning humility? People can surprise you, I replied, turning back to my work. Sometimes they just need the right motivation to change. The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and decisions. Summit Plaza ran smoother now, with clear protocols and transparent communications, replacing the old system of executive privileges and hidden agendas. Even the security guards seemed more relaxed, no longer required to enforce arbitrary rules based on status. As evening approached, I took my usual walk through the building. The atmosphere had transformed over the past month. Where there had once been tension and political maneuvering, there was now professional focus and collaborative energy. Near the ground floor, I passed the wall where building ownership history was displayed. My name and portrait had recently been added. Allison Reynolds, CEO, Vertex Properties. The simple gold lettering made no mention of the dramatic story behind my acquisition, no hint of the personal journey that had led to this point. It didn't need to. Success, I'd learned, wasn't about revenge or proving others wrong. It was about proving yourself right, about building something meaningful and lasting. Mitchell's humbled transformation was just a bonus. The real victory was in creating a business culture that valued substance over appearance, truth over inflation, and capability over confidence. My phone buzzed with a message from Aaron. First mentorship program orientation scheduled for next week. 25 participants confirmed. I smiled, imagining another underestimated woman out there, waiting for her chance to prove herself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's using your success to ensure others don't face the same barriers you did. 6 months after the day I revealed my ownership of Summit Plaza, I stood at the podium during Vertex Properties' annual investor conference. The auditorium was packed with shareholders, industry leaders, and, most importantly, the first graduating class of our Women's Business Mentorship program. Success, I began, looking out over the gathered crowd, isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. My gaze swept across the room, catching familiar faces. When I acquired Summit Plaza, many assumed it was about revenge. The truth is, it was about transformation. Not just of a building, but of an entire business culture. The statistics displayed behind me told the story better than words could. Tenant satisfaction up 87%, operating costs down 32%, and occupancy rates at an all-time high. But numbers, while important, weren't the whole story. Real estate isn't just about buildings, I continued. It's about creating spaces where people can grow, where talent can flourish, where success is measured by more than just profit margins. In the front row, I spotted Mitchell sitting quietly. No longer the arrogant CEO, but now a respected data analyst whose efficiency recommendations were revolutionizing how Sterling Tech utilized their space. Beside him sat Chris Anderson, who'd been promoted to CEO after proving his commitment to transparent business practices. 6 months ago, Summit Plaza was a symbol of traditional corporate hierarchy, I said, advancing to the next slide. Today, it's a model of modern business efficiency, but more importantly, it's proof that success built on integrity lasts longer than success built on appearances. The audience stirred as I clicked to a photo of our mentorship program graduates. 25 women, each with their own story of being underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. Each now armed with the skills and confidence to reshape their own futures. This, I gestured to the image, is my true revenge. Not the acquisition of a building, not the reversal of power, but the opportunity to ensure that no other talented individual has their abilities dismissed or their dreams denied. From my position on stage, I could see Logan and Ryan sharing proud smiles. They'd been there from the beginning, believing in my vision when it seemed impossible. Now they helped lead a company that was changing industry standards. Someone once told me I'd never understand business, I continued, allowing myself a small smile. They were right about one thing. I didn't understand business as they practiced it. I didn't understand why success had to come at others' expense, why power had to mean domination rather than elevation. The next slide showed Summit Plaza at night, its windows glowing with possibility. Today, Vertex Properties owns 15 major buildings in this city. But our real assets aren't made of steel and glass. They're the people who've learned that. True success comes from lifting others as you climb. In the audience, I spotted Ashley sitting near the back. She'd recently launched her own small consulting firm, building an honest business from the ground up. Our eyes met briefly, and she nodded, a gesture of respect between two women who'd learned different but equally valuable lessons about success. The business world is changing, I said, moving toward my conclusion. The old models of power and success are giving way to something more sustainable, more inclusive. My story isn't unique. It's just one example of what's possible when talent refuses to be dismissed. The lights dimmed slightly as I clicked to the final slide. A split image, showing Summit Plaza 3 years ago and today. The physical building looked the same, but the energy it projected was completely different. So let me leave you with this thought, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. The next time someone tells you that you don't understand business, that you'll never succeed, that your dreams are too big, remember this. Sometimes the best response isn't to prove them wrong. It's to prove yourself right. The applause that followed wasn't just for me. It was for every person who'd ever been underestimated, every dream that had been dismissed, every talent that had been overlooked. Later that evening, as I stood in my office watching the sunset paint the city skyline, Aaron brought in a curious delivery. Mitchell's old nameplate from his executive office days. "He thought you might want this," she said, reading from the attached note, "as a reminder of how far you've come." I picked up the nameplate, feeling its weight in my hands. The man who had once dismissed my business acumen now worked in a cubicle, finding satisfaction in honest work well done. The woman who had tried to replace me had found her own path to success. And I I had built something far more valuable than a real estate empire. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Saw your speech online. You didn't just prove them wrong, sweetheart. You showed them a better way." Smiling, I placed Mitchell's old nameplate in my desk drawer. I didn't need reminders of the past anymore. The view from my office showed something far more important. A future where success wasn't measured by who you could dominate, but by who you could elevate. The sun set over the city, casting long shadows across Summit Plaza's gleaming facade. In the gathering dusk, its windows lit up one by one, each light representing someone working toward their own dreams, in a space where talent was recognized, potential was nurtured, and success meant more than just winning. This, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. Not the defeat of those who doubted you, but the creation of something so undeniably positive that it transformed even your adversaries into allies. Sometimes the best way to overcome the past isn't to destroy it, but to build something better in its place. And that's exactly what I had done. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.